My husband found me having a good time in the kitchen one day. It wasn't what he thought. I was laughing. A real, genuine laugh that felt foreign on my tongue. While Marco, our new cook, showed me how to properly chiffonade basil. His hands, scarred and capable, moved with an effortless grace mine would never possess. The air smelled of garlic and tomatoes, and something else. Something light and dangerous. Before we get any further, you need to subscribe. This story takes a turn you will not see coming. Mark stood in the doorway, his briefcase in hand, his face a carefully blank mask. He'd come home early from the firm. Marco didn't jump. He just finished his knife stroke, creating a perfect pile of emerald green ribbons. "Ma'am," he said with a slight formal nod, and then he quietly left the kitchen, giving us the room. The silence he left behind was heavy, suffocating. Mark placed his briefcase on the granite counter with a soft, definitive click. "I see," he said. "You don't see anything, Mark." My heart was hammering, but my voice was steady. "I see my wife, who can't be bothered to remember our anniversary, gazing at the help like a schoolgirl." His voice was cold, clipped. This was the lawyer in him, building a case. He was showing me how to cut basil. "Don't insult my intelligence, Evelyn." He walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, and poured himself a glass. He took a long sip. "His name is Marco Silvano, retired Army mess sergeant, 62 years old. I ran a background check before I hired him. Of course he did. Mark vetted everyone." "He's a good man," I said, the defensiveness in my tone betraying me. "I'm sure he is." Mark turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw something beneath the cold anger. Not hurt, but calculation? This presents an opportunity. An opportunity, not a betrayal, not a heartbreak. An opportunity. "What are you talking about?" He set his glass down. "We need to talk, but not here. The study. Now." I followed him, my mind racing. I expected rage, accusations, threats of divorce. I was prepared for a war. I was not prepared for this calm, procedural tone. He closed the study door behind us. The room was his domain, all dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and expensive whiskey. "I have a proposition," he began, sitting behind his massive desk, steepling his fingers. "A mutual understanding." I remained standing. "I'm listening." "You have feelings for Mr. Silvano, or, at the very least, you enjoy his company." He said it like a clinical diagnosis. "I am not going to divorce you. The financials would be a nightmare, the social embarrassment for both of us. Unacceptable. This was about money and appearances. It was always about money and appearances. So what? I get to have an affair with the cook and you just look the other way? The absurdity of it made me want to laugh or scream. "In a manner of speaking," he said, his gaze level. "Because I require the same courtesy." The world tilted. "What?" "You heard me, Evelyn. I am in love with someone else." The words landed not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. The late nights at the office, the weekend, conferences, the emotional distance that had grown between us over the years. A glacier I thought was my fault. It wasn't a glacier. It was a wall he had built, brick by brick, to keep me out of his other life. Who? The word was a whisper. "Her name is Angela. She's a litigation consultant, 38. We've been together for 3 years. 3 years. He'd had a whole other life for 3 years, and I'd been alone in this big empty house, feeling guilty for my own loneliness." He opened a drawer and pulled out a file. Of course he had a file. He slid it across the desk. Inside were photographs. Mark with a beautiful dark-haired woman laughing on a sailboat, having dinner at a cozy-looking restaurant. They looked happy. He looked at her the way he used to look at me. I looked from the photos to my husband's face. There was no shame, no apology. Just a calm, businesslike expectation. "The terms are simple," he said. "We maintain the public facade. The house, the charity galas, the Christmas cards. In private, we live our own lives. Discreetly. You with your cook, me with Angela." It was the most unromantic, cold-blooded proposal I had ever heard. It was also, in its own twisted way, the most honest conversation we'd had in a decade. My husband didn't want to fight for me. He didn't want to punish me. He wanted to make a deal. He had found my potential indiscretion, and he saw it not as a threat, but as a leverage point. I thought of Marco's quiet strength, his stories of army kitchens in foreign lands, the way he made me feel seen, not as Mark's wife, but as Evelyn. I thought of the long, lonely years stretching ahead in this gilded cage. I looked at my husband, this stranger I had married 25 years ago. "Okay," I said. His lips curved into a thin, satisfied smile. "Good. I'll have the lawyers draw up a post-nuptial agreement outlining the financial arrangements to ensure everything remains." "Stable." He picked up his phone, the conversation clearly over. I was dismissed. I walked out of the study, my legs shaky. I went back to the kitchen. It was empty. The basil was still on the cutting board. I picked up a leaf and crushed it between my fingers, releasing its sharp, sweet scent. My husband had caught me falling in love, and instead of a divorce, he offered me a partnership in deception. Our marriage was over. Our arrangement was just beginning. My only mistake was thinking he would care. His was giving me the key to my own cage. The post-nuptial agreement arrived a week later, delivered by a humorless junior associate from Mark's firm. It was 23 pages long. It stipulated that in exchange for maintaining the public facade of a harmonious marital partnership, my standard monthly allowance would be doubled, and I would retain sole ownership of the beach house my father had left me. There were clauses about discretion, about avoiding public scandals, and a specific, almost laughable addendum that stated, "The hired domestic staff, including but not limited to one Marco Silvano, are not to be included in any joint social engagements or family photographs." I signed it without reading the final few pages. What was the point? It was a corporate merger of two separate lives. Mark signed it with a flourish, the way he signed all his big deals. We were now business partners in the enterprise of Mark and Evelyn. Life took on a strange, bifurcated rhythm. By day, we were the power couple. We hosted a dinner party for the senior partners. I wore a black designer gown and made polite conversation about golf handicaps and stock portfolios. Mark's hand rested on the small of my back, a proprietorial gesture that now felt like a brand. I saw the way the other wives looked at me, with a mixture of pity and envy. They saw the perfect life. They didn't see the contract. By night, the house became a territory with clearly drawn, if unspoken, borders. Mark spent most evenings at his club, which I now knew was a code for Angela's apartment. I stayed in the East Wing, with its own sitting room and kitchenette. And Marco was there. He came 3 days a week. Our interactions were initially strained, shadowed by the unspoken truth of what Mark knew. He was professionally distant, calling me ma'am, and keeping his eyes on his work. But the kitchen remained our neutral ground, the one place the facade didn't have to be perfect. One afternoon, I was trying to follow a complicated recipe for coq au vin, a dish Mark had always loved. I was butchering it. The chicken was dry. The sauce was a grainy, broken mess. I slammed a pot down in frustration, near tears. Marco, who had been quietly polishing silverware, looked over. "You're rushing the roux," he said, his voice quiet. "And you need more wine. A lot more." "I'm hopeless," I muttered, wiping my hands on a towel. He walked over, took the spoon from my hand, and assessed the damage. "It's salvageable." He moved around the kitchen with an economy of motion, adding butter, sprinkling in flour, whisking in a generous glug of red wine from a bottle he'd opened. "Cooking is like a battle, ma'am. You have to assess the terrain, use your resources, and sometimes—" He gave the pot a vigorous stir. "You have to retreat and regroup." I watched him, this retired soldier, fixing my failed sauce. "Did you ever have to retreat? In the army?" He didn't look up from the pot. "A few times. Sometimes a tactical retreat is the only way to win the war." He finally glanced at me. "This situation in your house, it's a tactical retreat." His perception was a shock. He saw it all. The coldness, the separate lives, the business arrangement. He saw the war I was fighting for my own soul. "It feels like a surrender," I confessed, the words slipping out. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. "A surrender is when you give up. A retreat is when you live to fight another day, on your own terms." He finished the sauce, tasting it with a clean spoon before handing it to me. It was rich, deep, perfect. He had taken my failure and turned it into something beautiful. That was the day the ma'am started to fade. He began calling me Evelyn when we were alone in the kitchen. He'd tell me stories. Not just army stories, but stories about growing up in Sicily, about his late wife, about his daughter who was a doctor in Chicago. I told him about my life before Mark, about my dreams of being an artist, dreams I'd packed away in a trunk like old clothes. The kitchen became more than a room. It became a country of two, with its own language and its own rules. We weren't having an affair, not in the way Mark and Angela were. It was slower, deeper. It was the careful, deliberate building of a friendship that felt more intimate than any physical act could be. Mark, for his part, was happier than I had seen him in years. The tension was gone from his shoulders. He was free. He assumed I was too, in my own way. He never asked about Marco, and I never asked about Angela. The agreement was working perfectly. But a contract can't govern the heart. Mark had traded a marriage for an arrangement. He thought he'd gotten the better end of the deal. His freedom and his pristine public image. He didn't realize that in the quiet of the kitchen, with the smell of garlic and basil in the air, I wasn't just retreating. I was building a new army, and my general was a retired mess cook who knew that the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with patience and truth and a perfectly made roux. The charity gala for the City Symphony was the biggest event of the social calendar. It was the kind of night the agreement was designed for. I wore a silver gown that cost more than Marco's car. Mark was in his tuxedo, the picture of powerful success. We smiled, we shook hands, we posed for pictures. We were flawless. Quick conversational voiceover. The facade is about to crack in the most public way possible. You need to see this. During the auction, Mark bid a small fortune on a week-long golf trip to Scotland, winning it with a smug nod to the room. It was for him and Angela, of course. I sipped my champagne and said nothing. This was the deal. Then the final lot came up. A private 7-course dinner for 10, prepared in the winner's home by a renowned local chef. The brochure didn't name him, but I knew. The charity chairwoman, a friend of mine, had begged me to convince Marco to donate his services. I'd asked him hesitantly. He'd simply nodded. "For you, Evelyn. I will do it." The bidding started. I had no intention of winning, but as the numbers climbed, a reckless, dangerous idea took root in my mind. Mark was distracted, laughing with the mayor. The auctioneer's voice was a hypnotic drone. $15,000 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 16? My hand holding the paddle twitched. Before I could think, I raised it. Mark's head snapped toward me. His smile was frozen. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. "Investing in the arts." I whispered back, my heart hammering. The bidding continued. Someone else bid 17. I bid 18. It was a silent, furious duel between me and a telecom executive across the room. The air crackled. People were watching, whispering. This was not discreet. This was not part of the agreement. $25,000. The auctioneer called out. "To the lovely Evelyn Thorne." Going once, twice, sold. The room broke into applause. Mark's hand was a vice on my arm. His face was a mask of cold fury. We had just very publicly bought a dinner that our own cook would be preparing. It was a farce. It was a declaration. The ride home was arctic. He didn't speak until the front door of our house closed behind us. "Have you lost your mind?" he snarled, throwing his car keys onto the hall table. $25,000? To show off your cook? It's for charity, Mark, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "And his name is Marco. Do not patronize me." This was a stunt, a pathetic attempt to flaunt your little kitchen romance in front of the entire city. "It's not a romance," I said. And it was the truth. It was something else, something I didn't have a name for yet. He's my friend. Friend? He let out a short, brutal laugh. You are my wife. You will act like it. This dinner is not happening. I will call the charity tomorrow and make a donation. We will cite a scheduling conflict. No, I said. The word hung in the air between us, simple and absolute. I had never outright refused him before. His eyes widened. What did you say? I said no. I won the dinner. It will happen here. Marco will cook it. He took a step toward me, and for a moment I saw the real man beneath the polished lawyer, angry, entitled, used to getting his way. I forbid it. You can't, I replied, meeting his gaze. According to the agreement you wrote, my personal life is my own. This falls under that category. It's a private dinner party. You are, of course, welcome to attend. Or you can be at your club. The shock on his face was priceless. I had used his own contract against him. He had been so sure he was the smartest man in the room, but he'd created a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. The week of the dinner arrived. Marco and I planned the menu together. It was a symphony of its own. Handmade pasta, a delicate fish course, a roast so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. The house was filled with the smells of his art. The night of the dinner, the guests arrived. My friends, mostly. A few curious acquaintances from the gala. Mark, to my surprise, did not go to his club. He stayed, a silent, brooding presence at the head of the table, nursing a scotch. Marco was a maestro. He served each course with a quiet explanation, his voice a steady, confident murmur. The guests were enthralled. They weren't just eating food. They were experiencing it. I watched him, this man in a simple white jacket, commanding the room with more genuine authority than Mark ever had with his wealth and his threats. During the dessert course, a sublime tiramisu, one of the guests, a bubbly, slightly tipsy Galeriona named Beatrice, raised her glass. To Evelyn for winning this magnificent evening. And to this incredible chef. Marco, you are an artist? Where have you been hiding? All eyes turned to Marco. He gave a small, humble smile. I have been here, cooking for Evelyn. It was a simple statement, but the way he said, for Evelyn, with a quiet possessiveness, a sense of shared history, it changed the atmosphere in the room. It was no longer a charity dinner. It was a showcase, a reveal. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. If you'll all excuse me, he said, his voice tight. A pressing matter at the office. He left the room. The door to his study closed with a definitive thud. The dinner continued, but the energy had shifted. The facade had cracked, right there in the dining room. People had seen it. They had seen my husband's rage and his retreat. They had seen my calm defiance. And they had seen the quiet, powerful connection between me and the cook. Later, after the last guest had left, I found Marco in the kitchen, washing the final pans. The house was quiet. You were magnificent, I said. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. He looked at me, his dark eyes serious. That was not just a dinner, Evelyn. I know. He will not let this stand, Marco said. A man like that, he has conceded territory tonight. In his mind, he has lost face. He will look to regain it. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Marco nodded slowly. Good, but the battle is not over. He will change his tactics. He stepped closer, and for the first time he reached out and took my hand. His grip was strong, calloused, real. But remember, you are not retreating anymore. You are advancing. My husband thought he could control the narrative with a legal document. He thought he could compartmentalize our lives into neat, separate boxes. But he forgot that the heart doesn't understand contracts. And he severely underestimated the woman he had married, and the man who had taught her how to fight. The dinner was over. The war for my life had just entered a new and far more dangerous phase. Mark's new tactic was silence. A cold, calculated silence that filled the house like a gas. He didn't yell. He didn't mention the dinner. He simply ceased to acknowledge my existence unless we were in public. At a fundraiser the following week, he held my hand, his grip firm and fake. The moment we were in the car, he let go as if my skin were acid. He was trying to freeze me out to make me feel like a ghost in my own home. It was more unnerving than his anger. I didn't freeze. I thrived. With Marco's quiet encouragement, I started painting again. I turned the sunroom into a studio. Canvases and the smell of turpentine replaced the stale air of perfection. I started volunteering at the Community Arts Center, teaching a class for seniors. I had a life, a real one, buzzing and colorful, existing entirely outside the gilded cage of my marriage. Mark watched it all from a distance, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It was more like confusion. He had expected me to break, to come crawling back, begging for the return of the cold, comfortable numbness of our old life. Instead, I was building a new one from the ashes, and I was happy. The final straw for him came on a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen with Marco, both of us covered in flour, laughing as we tried and failed to shape sourdough into something recognizable. The doorbell rang. It was a delivery for me. A large flat box. Inside was a new set of professional-grade oil paints, the kind I'd wistfully mentioned to Marco weeks ago. I looked at him. He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. A soldier knows an artist needs her proper tools. That was the moment Mark chose to walk into the kitchen. He stood there, taking in the scene. The flour, the laughter, the intimate, unspoken understanding between us. The expensive paints. He saw the life he wasn't a part of, and for the first time I saw something like loss in his eyes. Evelyn, my study, now. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the warmth of the kitchen like a shard of ice. I followed him, wiping my hands on my apron. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood by the window, his back to me. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice low. "What has, Mark? This performance? The painting, the volunteering, him." He turned around. "You're making a fool of me." "I'm living my life," I corrected him. "According to the agreement you drafted." The agreement was for discretion, he snapped, his composure finally breaking. "Not for you to flaunt your midlife crisis with the kitchen staff for the whole world to see. The world doesn't care, Mark. You care. Because you've lost control. You had a wife you could ignore, and now you have a person you can't predict. That frightens you more than any affair." He stared at me, and I saw the truth of my words hit him. He had never loved me, not really. He had possessed me, and now he was watching his possession develop a soul of its own. "I want a divorce," he said. The words were flat, final. I felt a surge of triumph so pure it was dizzying. This was the moment. "The checkmate." "No," I said. He blinked. "What?" I said no. "I don't want a divorce." His confusion was almost comical. "But you have him. You have your new life." "I do. And I also have this house, the social standing, the financial security. Why would I give that up? The agreement is working perfectly for me. I have my freedom and I have your money. It's the best of both worlds." I was using his own logic, his own cold-blooded calculus, against him. He had created a monster in his own image. "You're bluffing," he stammered. "I'm not. You wanted a business arrangement, Mark. You have one. I'm your business partner, and I'm exercising my right to see this profitable venture continue." I walked to the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Marco and I are attempting bread. It's not going well, but we're having a wonderful time." I left him standing there, utterly defeated. He had thought the ultimate power was in being the one to ask for the divorce. I had just shown him that the real power was in refusing it. A week later, Mark moved out. He went to Angela's. The public story, which we crafted together with the help of his PR firm, was one of an amicable separation, a mutual decision to pursue different paths. There was no scandal, no messy divorce, just a quiet, dignified end. The house was mine. The life was mine. Marco still comes to cook, but now he also stays for dinner. We eat at the big kitchen table, not the formal dining room. We talk. We laugh. We are building something real, Something slow and steady and honest. My husband found me having a good time in the kitchen. He thought it was the beginning of a scandal. He thought he could control it with a contract. He never understood that it was actually the beginning of my liberation. He gave me the key, and I simply walked out of the cage, locking the door behind me. He got his freedom with Angela, and I got everything else.